tried to reach him with her hands, but the vase slipped and fell to the ground, shattering. Pepper watched as her motionless brother lay among the vase shards, the shards embedded in his hands, legs, stomach and face. A red puddle quickly formed on the floor. Pepper immediately screamed, calling for their parents' help. They were shocked and rushed George to the hospital. He received numerous stitches, lay in a coma for several days, but he survived. Scars remained on his body, reminding him of that day. He no longer enjoyed playing hide and seek. Pepper and George loved playing together outside, but on this day, leaving the house was the worst decision. The storm caused terrible losses to their family. That day, Pepper went with George for a picnic outside. They took toys with them, and under the sunny weather, they ate cookies with juice. As soon as they finished, they heard thunder. A storm was approaching, and Mummy Pig called them to go home as quickly as possible. Daddy Pig wasn't worried about it, but the sky was getting darker and darker. But then it turned out that Pepper had left a toy in the garden, and Daddy Pig went to retrieve it, not thinking about his safety. He went down to the toy, and then lightning struck. Lightning struck a tree he was standing too close to. He fell unconscious. His family watched this happen. Pepper and George were scared, and Mummy Pig ran to call an ambulance. But when she dialed the number, she realized that the connection wasn't working because of the storm. She told Pepper to stay at home, and she herself ran to Daddy Pig. He lay unconscious under the cold rain, but he had a pulse. Mummy Pig was glad that he was alive. She thought she could carry him home. But when she tried to pull him home, she couldn't do it. He weighed too much, and the path home was slippery from the rain. She could never have carried him up the hill to the house. Mummy Pig ran to the nearest neighbors, leaving George and Pepper alone. They sat at home and shuddered at every roll of thunder. Meanwhile, Daddy Pig was still alive. He began to regain consciousness, but was paralyzed. Because the rain didn't stop, a puddle began to form under him. When Mummy Pig tried to move him, she left him face down. Now, in addition to hypothermia from the cold and wetness, his face was pressed right into the mud. It was getting harder for him to breathe. Almost an hour later, the storm had already ended, and at that time, Mummy Pig came with Dr. Brown Bear. But Daddy Pig was no longer breathing. After a long time, Mummy Pig continues to blame herself for this, and Pepper and George will never stop being afraid of thunder. It all started when Daddy Pig was tired. He was tired of work and family, and he wanted to be alone for a day. This day he was able to take a day off from work and go to the forest instead. It was a place where he could have some quiet time to himself. He took some food and his phone and went to the forest. He went to the forest without telling anyone. This is the reason for the horrible situation he got into. He stopped the car in the middle of the road and walked into the woods. Here he could think without the distractions of family. He walked deeper and deeper into the forest until he finally found a clearing. He laid out a picnic on it, but suddenly remembered that he had forgotten his lighter in the car to start a fire. It was far enough away from the car, but he decided to walk there and back. There was no sign of trouble. He walked the same route, but halfway there he heard a crunch.
Belvita, with 5 whole grains baked into one delicious biscuit, positive energy starts here.
A tree had fallen on him. Now Daddy Pig was lying on the grass, pinned down by the massive tree. He couldn't move to get out. The tree was pressing down on him so hard that he could barely breathe. For such cases, he has a phone in his backpack. All he has to do is get it out and call for help. He opens his backpack but doesn't find his phone. Daddy Pig left his phone at the picnic site, and now he has no hope of salvation. He screamed, calling for help, but there was no one in the woods. The next day, his back began to hurt seriously. He began to suffer from hunger and lack of movement. He could put up with the hunger, but the next morning he ran out of water. He stayed thirsty until the evening until it started to rain. He collected rainwater in a bottle. The pain was constant, But what truly tormented him was the fear of never seeing his family again. So he survived day by day, growing weaker and weaker. It had been at least a week. He had stopped counting the days. He lay there and imagined that he would be gone. He should have told everyone where he was going. He should have kept his phone with him at all times. At that moment, he felt that he could breathe freely, and gripped by hope, he tried again to get out from under the tree. He succeeded. He had lost a terrible amount of weight, which allowed him to squeeze through. Now he was free, but days of lying in one position had taken their toll. He couldn't get up. His body had weakened and all he could do was crawl. He could crawl to the car, but the picnic has food and a phone, that's all he needs. He headed that way. It was incredibly difficult. With every movement, he had a feeling he was about to pass out. But the thought that he would be able to eat and call for help motivated him. However, when he crawled, he realized a terrible thing. The food he laid out had already rotted or been eaten by birds. He tried to call his family, but the phone was broken. Perhaps it happened because of the water that got on it during the rain. Daddy Pig might have guessed, but he was no longer guided by reason. He should have crawled to the car then, although it is unlikely that he could drive a car in such a state. Now, all he could do was crawl and crawl towards the car, hoping that he could get out of the forest.
I had a salad made for this morning, but I dreamed of something more substantial, something that would fit my nature. I know I'm not allowed to eat meat. That's how we live here. But sometimes I can't stand it. A wolf should eat meat. My cave, nestled deep in the forest, was a place where I could hide my true nature from the eyes of my neighbors. There were a lot of ducks in the lake nearby. I knew I had to be careful. If anyone walked by and noticed what I was doing, they might kick me out of here or do something worse to me. That's why I go hunting very early, when everyone is still asleep, and the ducks have just arrived at the lake. I went deeper into the bushes. I waited, and finally I saw a duck. The duck came out of the lake, and I jumped on it. When I got to the cave, the duck was still moving in my mouth, bleeding. Back in my cave, I started butchering the duck. The air was filled with the smell of fresh meat, which I had already forgotten in this vegetarian world. I worked fast. I need to hurry. I shouldn't have been caught doing this. There are no feathers left on the duck. The skin was torn in places. The internal organs have already been extracted. When I was about to make a fire to roast it, I heard the sound of footsteps outside. My heart skipped a beat. Someone was walking right towards my cave. Who is it? What does he want from me? I turned around. It was George. He was following the blood trail. How could I forget and leave such traces behind me? I hid the duck behind a rock, trying not to leave any evidence. He was still standing at the exit, not daring to enter the dark cave. I hoped that he could not see anything, because his eyes were not adjusted to the darkness. I told him he'd better go home. But he suddenly ran into the cave, right to that stone. I think he saw me put something there. I couldn't stop him, and now he's grabbed the duck. It was my meal, my secret. He looked like he didn't understand what it was. I tried to keep my cool and told him it was just a toy I found in the woods. I think it worked and he believed it. But what if it doesn't? And he will tell everyone. He can't speak yet, but letting him go is a risk. I thought about killing George. I thought about the tender pork that was in front of me. I've never eaten pork. I could end it all right here. I'll hide his remains well, and no one will find him. No one will know the secret. But then,
George!
I heard the distant call of his parents. Their screams echoed through the forest, snapping me out of my fantasies. If they find me with George dead, it could end very badly. I took a deep breath and took the duck out of George's hands. I said, "Let's go find your mom and dad." I couldn't let his parents find traces of blood on the ground. I washed the blood off me. Then I led George through the forest. I found his parents and told them not to go so deep into the forest and keep an eye on their child. I returned to the cave, where no one was around anymore, and I was able to enjoy my lunch.